I'm Ibrahim Khan. Every month, I help 4 million plus Muslims with their personal finances and investing. I've been lucky enough to write a book on halal investing, and today I'm going to be looking at finance TikTok. There are some people on finance TikTok which are great. You should listen to them. You'll prosper by listening to them. But some people you really shouldn't be listening to. It'd be like going to a Pakistani street dentist to get your tooth removed. Don't do it. Right, let's dive in.
The Islamic sector, they have a couple of banks here in the United Kingdom that offer mortgages which are Islamic, which are much higher than the retail banks. They've got a very unique structure where they've got two contracts that you're forced to be in. One of them is a contract of rent and one of them is a contract of purchase. Both of them together, if you were to get a mortgage from a bank, it would be less.
Surely that means though that the bank that you're going to get this from, they're making more money off it. It's still sort of unethical though to be skimming off the top so much of people that are supposed to be your brothers, no?
So Mr. Hijab, I do like the guy. He is funny, he is entertaining, but he's put me, as he would say, into a bit of a moral quandary. That's what he kept on saying to Piers Morgan. But Mr. Hijab has put me into a moral quandary. Look, on this subject, when it comes to exploitation, as the host was talking about, I don't think it's necessarily exploitation in the classic sense, because people seem to think that because there's an Islamic bank as opposed to a normal bank, this Islamic bank should now be the equivalent of Redbridge Islamic Centre or East London Mosque. It should be a charity. It should be handing out freebies to people, but that's not how it works. An Islamic bank is helping you get onto the housing ladder, but it is going to make a profit. It is going to make a rental return in that period of time. And actually, many Islamic banks, for many periods of time, whilst they were scaling up, were not actually profitable at all. So the margins that Islamic banks are making, in most cases, I think are pretty appropriate. The way that we drive the prices down overall is by getting more and more people into the market so that competition drives the overall prices down. But that's only going to happen if we participate in this ecosystem. All right, Farish Ahmadi. See what he has to say.
Many scholars have stopped. They said we don't know about cryptocurrency, so they didn't give a fatwa. Other scholars and committees, they said it's haram, and one of the scholars is Sheikh Sulaiman al-Rahili that I follow and I trust his knowledge. Now, one of the main reasons why it's haram is because there's no official entity or government that guarantees the currency. Like, for example, currencies of a country, the government of that country guarantees its currency. In cryptocurrency, it's not the same. It's ambiguous. Nobody guarantees it. Another thing, it has very high risk, and this is gharar in Islam. It's not allowed. So the value of the currency fluctuates a lot, and it kind of makes it like gambling. Today you buy it, for example, $1,000. The value is $1,000. A week later, it's $30,000. Let's be honest, today people are using cryptocurrency to invest and make more money, a quick buck, not because they just want to use it as a currency. Prophet ﷺ said, leave what's unclear to what's clear.
Okay, so I don't know who Faris Hamadi is, so I want to be respectful in case he is someone very learned. But what I would say is, let's looking at the two arguments, and of course there's scholars who have said, by the way, that cryptocurrency is perfectly fine. That is largely my viewpoint as well, with exceptions on some of the underlying cryptocurrencies. But the argument that because some government hasn't guaranteed the value of a currency doesn't really make sense because of a few different things. The first is that governments don't necessarily guarantee the value of a currency. They just have the ability to print more of it. And because of that, and they also have the ability to demand taxes in that denomination of that currency. So they can create some level of demand for that currency and they can create the supply of that currency. So that's what they can do. Now, what the governments don't have control over when it comes to Bitcoin is the ability to create it and the ability to control or influence the demand in some way, shape or form. So I don't necessarily think that the argument around guaranteeing necessarily works. And also, I'm not sure even if a government did underpin or guarantee the value of a currency, I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that makes it more Islamic or not, because I don't think it's part of the conversation when it comes to the haram or halal of it. The second thing I would say, when it comes to the volatility, I don't think volatility in itself, even extreme volatility, is intrinsically haram or halal. You can have highly volatile goods, commodities that go up and down in price. That's very normal. So the levels of fluctuation of Bitcoin, which by the way are volatile, but they're not any more volatile than, let's say, some smaller stocks or some particularly volatile periods during a trading session. The volatility itself doesn't make something impermissible. So I would respectfully disagree. Right, next one.
If you look at riba, for example, it's one of the only sins. In fact, it's the only sin mentioned in the Quran in a certain way. You know, if you look at adultery and that, Allah says don't go close to it and so on. And Allah speaks of forgiveness and so on. But when it comes to eating of interest and usury, Allah says whoever is not going to abstain from this, I announce war against that person. There's no other sin where Allah says I announce war. And the scholars say the reason is you're stealing the money of someone else. You're making the poor poorer and you're making the rich richer at the expense of the poor. Because there are two things in wealth. It's the amount and the blessings of it. People sometimes have thousands, no blessings. Where did it go? I don't know. And sometimes people have just a few dollars or pounds, and it's blessed. They do a lot with it. That's what it is.
Mufti Menk, I mean, I think he's completely bang on. All he's done is he's explained what the Quran says. So of course I'm going to agree with it. And he's completely right that riba is something that is pervasive in our society, and it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns against very severely. And I would say that, you know, there's a poem by Imam Shafi'i who talks about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who feeds the birds when they go out every morning. They go out hungry and they come back fully fed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who will bring rizq, even if it's at the bottom of the ocean, to us if that is written for us. You know, there was those people that died when that submarine burst near the Titanic. I mean, can you imagine the angel of death waiting down there thinking, what on earth am I doing here? And then these guys descend down there. But at the same time, you know, the opposite is also true. You know, sometimes we mine the earth and we get out rizq for us to be able to use that people never ever thought was possible. Like, you know, in Saudi Arabia, where they're mining and they're drilling for oil, let's say 200, 300 years ago, it was just a desert. No one realized or thought that they were sat on top of an absolute fortune. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who provides, and we should believe in that, and we should look for the barakah in our wealth and avoid riba. Moving on, Brother Kareem, here we go. Brother Kareem.
Before you finance a car, before you borrow money, before you take out a loan, before you get a mortgage on a house, before you get that student loan, just remember, Allah tells us in the Quran, stay away from interest. This is the verse in the Quran. Allah tells us to stay away from interest, and if you do get into interest, you are waging war against Allah. I don't know about you, but me, I couldn't go to war with Allah. I couldn't go to war with Allah, and I most definitely couldn't win. Just remember this before you take out that haram loan, before you take out the interest. Just remember, Allah tells you stay away from it for a reason. There's wisdom behind what Allah teaches in the Quran. It's for us to listen and learn.
Brother Kareem is, I think, pretty much bang on in terms of what he's saying. The only thing I would say is when it comes to saying things are haram and halal, one needs to tread very cautiously. I personally try and, you know, most of the time, hopefully, you know, someone will now dig up one of my old videos, but most of the time I try and avoid saying, you know, with absolute aplomb and certainty that this is haram, this is halal. And the reason is because, you know, even with student finance, even with mortgages, even with, you know, all of these different things, bank accounts, whatever you name it, there are actually hues and colors when it comes to perspectives and arguments and necessity and when something is allowed and something isn't allowed. But Brother Kareem is, as a rule of thumb, as a starting point, he is completely correct that all of this is impermissible, and we should be very, very cautious about going towards something that is on the face of it based on interest.
If the company has income
Mr.
and
Suhaib, babe,
on his debt, why do scholars still say I can invest in these companies? Let me explain the controversial 5 and 30. Well, in the 80s, Muslims were falling behind in ways to preserve their wealth, and inflation was at an all-time high, and so money was losing its value faster than ever. For everyone else, the stock market was the go-to place to invest.
He's got the book.
But these weren't accessible to Muslims because almost all companies had some form of haram income or debt associated with them. So the scholars saw this as a necessity to address and came up with a criteria that was an acceptable range of impermissible income and debt levels a stock can have, the so-called 5 and 30% rules. There's a question mark around whether this should still be applicable.
Oh, he's got his cat in there.
And it's something that scholars continue to discuss and research
this is a
today.
sick video.
If the company has haram income and it pays...
Oh my God. It's fantastic. So hey babe has smashed it. Hang on. So, all right. I didn't realize he was doing TikTok videos. What a man. Yeah, I think he was pretty much bang on. I don't really have anything more to say than that. I do particularly like the cat. So kudos for that. We've got another one, Faris Hamadi. Right, let's go. Second Faris Hamadi video.
Day 4 only? People like have day 100 waiting for an answer.
Fix my hat first before I answer this. Okay, so let's deconstruct the question first. Going to university is permissible. Taking a loan is permissible. Interest is not permissible. So if you can go to university and take a loan without having to pay interest, that's permissible. But the problem is with the interest, and it's riba. It's one of the major sins in Islam. Now, I honestly don't know about the situation. What other options do you have? What's your lifestyle, your financial status? But I'm just giving you the technicality of the situation, okay? Wallahu a'lam.
Right, interesting. So I think he's right. If you've got an interest-bearing loan that is a student financial loan, then that is problematic, right? Especially if it's in, let's say, the USA, where it is just a conventional loan. In the UK, okay, you can make potentially an argument that it's some kind of student tax, or there are some arguments that one can potentially make. But in principle, he's completely correct. Now, there is a separate line of attack where you could say, because of necessity, we are going to allow this, because otherwise Muslims would just not be able to access higher education. I have sympathy for that point of view. I would look to try and avoid taking out a loan as much as humanly possible. And if, right at the end, you absolutely have to because there's no other way, then I could, see why you would go down that path. But as much as possible, you should be avoiding it. So I agree with Faris Hamadi.
What is the best financial advice you've ever received?
Invest in assets, not liabilities.
What is the worst financial advice you've ever received?
The way to build wealth is saving your money.
So true. Third question. What is something you used?
The way to wealth is saving your money. I don't understand. That is a good idea. But unless he's saying that you just save it and don't do anything with it. But I think if you are saving and investing it, that is obviously a good thing. The first point, investing in assets and not liabilities, yeah, very, very much agree with that.
Just a value that you don't anymore.
Material things.
What is something that you think
he doesn't value material things? I mean, wow.
People think is important when it comes to money, but you realize that's not really the right focus.
Net worth. Net worth is a crap indicator of real success.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. He's a real financial guru, this one.
The issue of student loans, right, is a matter that concerns
everyone's talking about student loans.
4.1 million Muslims across the UK. It is not right for Abu Taymiyyah to come here and give a fatwa. Whether he studied 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, and then he himself is going to give a fatwa, that is unacceptable. It's a big matter, right? It requires a panel of scholars and people of knowledge, right? People of intellect, people of khibrah, of expertise, to sit down on this matter and then to issue an Islamic verdict. One thing that the scholars agree is that this is a riba-based loan. It's an interest-based loan. What I can say, brothers and sisters, there are alternatives.
Not always.
What are the
Refer
alternatives?
that one to the third umpire.
Do you have to now finish university in 3 years? Is that a darura? Is that a necessity? No, it's not. There are many that I know who finish university in 5 years. Umpire. They do it part-time. And in between...
Oh, no, maybe, I think he's right, actually.
Right?
It's not a necessity to do it in 3 years.
And they're paying it off as they are studying. And subhanAllah, a lot of the alternatives that I provided for the sister and her brother, I took it from the kuffar, imagine that. They themselves don't want to take the loan. One of them is crowdfunding that they suggested, right? So there are...
And the reason why non-Muslims don't want to take out student loans is because you don't want to take out a loan for 30, 40, 50,000 and end up paying that back 250,000. Doesn't make any sense.
Alternatives, there definitely is. Who said it's a must that you have to finish university in 3 years, right? That's more of something that you desire, sahih. The alternative is that you could work in between and then finish it maybe at a later date.
Right? I think he's completely right here.
Behind in life, brothers and sisters. It took me 6 years in Al-Medina. And subhanAllah, I finished the same time when some of my other good friends finished. Right? So there are different alternatives that could, be looked at. When it comes to this, I personally, this was just a personal decision. I'm not enforcing it upon anyone. And I'm not telling anyone to drop out of university in any way, shape or form. When I went to university, I said to myself, if it comes down to me having to take this loan, I'm not going to take it. This is my view. I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, respect to the guy. I think he's gone about it exactly the right way. I mean, student loans, finance, it's just complicated stuff, guys. And he has said that, look, I'm not necessarily an expert in finance. And if you're going to do a fatwa on something, then you need to understand that thing, right? So it actually means that you need to have that understanding of finance as well. And he's kind of clearly said, look, this is my view, but you need to talk to people who have that expertise. I also really like his name, Abu Taymiyyah. All right, let's carry on.
As a 6-foot Muslim Indian software engineer, what are some things that you never invest in?
So 3 things primarily. Interest-bearing loans for typically like house mortgages, completely prohibited. S&P 500, most of them contain like non-sharia compliant, which is like non-Islamic stocks. And also most target date retirement funds, they put your money in bonds, which are interest accruing, which is not allowed.
Okay, so if you can't get a house mortgage, then how are you going to buy a house?
Well, thankfully I'm a software engineer, so that makes things a little easier, but my goal in life isn't to buy a house. I'd probably be comfortable renting and all that, and I think that as long as you...
I'm not sure about if you should be comfortable renting though.
Stick by your principles, you'll be successful in this life, hopefully.
Okay, so what are some things...
And the hereafter.
...that you actually invest in then?
Yeah, so every single week, I systematically invest my money into 2 Sharia-compliant index funds, which essentially take the S&P 500, but only the Sharia-compliant stocks. And I invest my money in there, and it's been going at a pretty good return.
Okay, but do you think this is holding you back from becoming rich quicker?
Honestly,
so it sounds like he's American, and the Americans, for some bizarre reason, are completely and utterly obsessed about stock investing, more so than any of the rest of the world. Completely obsessed about stock investing. Like, Desis are obsessed about gold and property. Americans are like unhealthily obsessed with stock investing. Same with Desis, probably unhealthily obsessed with gold and property. And it's just like cool. You absolutely should be done. Property, I love it. Gold, yeah, definitely. Stocks, love it. But going all in on this stuff starts to wear thin.
The quickest way to get rich is probably robbing people, right? And you obviously don't do that because there are laws and there are rules to...
It's not actually that quick to rob people. Like it takes a bit of time to rob. Like most people these days are not actually carrying around that much wealth. So you need to go to the right area. You need to scope out anyway. It's not the quickest place.
Abide by. And similarly, I'm just abiding by the laws of God. And what's the point of like living your life and making all that money if you have no principles to stick to?
Wow. It's good. Very good. I like this 6-foot tall Muslim engineer. Right, let's move on.
And I just want to say this right?
This is the Umar Suleiman.
Yeah. Every single
at least to me
Islamic finance scholar I've spoken to globally, every single one without a shadow of a doubt, and I've spoken to them and I've asked them the question, are the Islamic finance products we have halal in and of themselves in every time and every place? They said no. Because of the context and the situation wherein we've allowed them.
They said no.
Yeah. Because of the context and the situation that we're in, we allow them, so they are halal. We're not saying they're not halal,
but it's not for
it's
every time.
It's contextual.
Yes.
And in and of themselves, they aren't permissible.
So I've had, I think this is obviously a clip. I've had this conversation with Umar on, I think, our podcast as well. And obviously there's certain Islamic financial products which are obviously completely fine. I think Umar would agree with that. There are other products or there are other approaches that are not completely fine because there's been some level of compromise made. So for example, this whole 5 and 30% ratio around what amount of conventional debt is allowed in the stock market, that is a compromised position. Compromising around some Sharia wrappers, these are complicated products with lots of back-to-back transactions going on, I think is very much a compromised position as opposed to what one would come up with on a first principles basis. But then by the same token, I think ijara contracts and lots of lease contracts and simple murabaha contracts, there's lots of very good stuff out there that is completely uncontroversial and perfectly fine as well. So as I said, probably a clip out of a wider discussion, but there are things that are, I think, perfectly uncontroversial as well.
So the current rate of inflation is 3.8%. And now this is why it's super concerning for Muslims especially that the prices of everything are going up. If you put £100 in your bank now, remember we can't take interest on any of the savings that we put in the bank. So when the banks are saying that they're giving us 4.5% interest, we can't really accept that regardless. In a year's time, everything has gone up and your £100 is the same. So you're actually going to be able to purchase less items than you would have been able to a year before. So what are you actually doing to combat that? The best way you can beat inflation is to invest your money or to learn a high value skill and put it to good use. That is why my Halal Income Masterclass.
Yeah, I mean, look, the inflation point is completely correct. There is inflation. It eats away at your money. You can put it in an Islamic bank, though. You don't necessarily have to put it in a high street bank. You can put it in an Islamic bank. You can also invest it. The lady is quite correct on that. And I'm sure her course is going to be very useful as well.
It was probably my favorite comment on one of our videos. It's what is the most halal fund? And if you think about it, it does make sense, but at the same time, it's a little bit ridiculous. You know, the funds are deemed to be halal and sharia compliant, but you have the right intention and you want your fund to be as halal as possible. Great, but sometimes it's an issue of how deep are you going to go when it comes to finding something which is halal. The funds have been signed off as sharia compliant. They have strict screening criteria for the equities they hold. What more do you want? I mean, when you go to Nando's and you have a bit of chicken and the chicken's labelled as halal, which piece of chicken is the most halal? Are you going to go and ask how fast were the chickens killed?
The leg?
How fast was the blood
breast?
drained? In what way was Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim said over them when they were killed?
Did they say the ha
intention
properly?
of trying to buy?
Is it permissible if you've got a Pakistani saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, or do you have to be going Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, like Mahir al-Mu'aqqili or something?
Buy the most halal equities and the most halal funds out there. But sometimes I think we have to be realistic in terms of if someone with knowledge has signed something off, as long as it's not ridiculous and a number of people are in agreement on it, then do we always have to ask what's more halal than this? Something to think about. But great comment, loved it.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that the brother is making here, because we just in the last video we're talking about compromised positions, right? That Islamic scholars have come to a decision on, and you and I, we are not Islamic scholars. We are not, people who are experts in this space, who spent time understanding the space, and yet we feel like, actually we have a view on this, we have an opinion on this, and we're going to chime in and we're going to have our 2 pennies worth. And the reality of the matter is that stuff is complicated, right? He was talking about halal chicken. Has anyone ever actually been to an abattoir? Does anyone understand what the supply chain looks like in halal food properly? Has anyone actually done that? I've actually been to an abattoir. I've actually seen what happens. I've talked to people who are involved with the whole certification thing, both on the chicken and the lamb side. It's not as straightforward as one might think, and yet we trust people who say this is halal, and there's a level of trust associated with certain brands, and then you go with that and you trust it. And this exactly the same thing with Islamic finance and halal investing as well. You have scholars there. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say فَفْعَلُوا مَا شِئْتُمْ. It doesn't say that. Like, if you disagree, then you've got like a get out of jail free card. No, you still have to listen to the Islamic scholars. So I think it's a great point. Okay.
Tax is a big issue for me. I don't like taxes. I don't understand taxes. Like, what? Like, when I hear people in the Western world paying 40, 50, 60% tax, it's like you work 5, 6 months, 7 months of the year for free, basically. That's what you're telling me. For what? For no safety, average education, below average healthcare. It's like, why are you even doing that? It's like, we don't pay tax in the UAE, but we get the most safest places in the world. We get amazing healthcare, and educating here is superb. Yes, we pay for it, but if you make the math, it's cheaper here than do the math. Tax is a big issue for me.
I think there's a very good argument to be made that the more expensive stuff in the UAE kind of balances out with the fact that you're potentially getting a better service, and ultimately you're not getting taxed at all. So I think there is an argument to be made there, but one does have to kind of look at it in the round as well. Overall, this country as a whole, there's a much bigger safety net when it comes to social welfare and social housing, etc., etc. Now there's the whole thing, unfortunately, right now is a bit broken in the UK, and people would argue, I think, in the USA as well. But that's a separate question. I think there are good reasons why we should have taxation. I mean, even Islam has a 2.5% wealth tax, which is zakat, right? And some people might not necessarily think of it as a tax, but effectively that is what it is. It's a compulsory amount that we have to pay, and we are giving it to certain things that are good for society as a whole. So even Islam has this element of that you need to be giving. Now, I think the issue that we have is where those taxes get get too high, and where those taxes start becoming egregious, and where those taxes are targeting those people who can't really fight back. So these taxes don't really seem to affect the super rich as much as they do the average man, who, because of the laws, PAYE and the national insurance and the tax is automatically deducted from their salaries, whereas the ultra rich guy, they have a lot more flex and they can get around this. I think that is actually a much more fundamental problem that we have at the moment when it comes to the taxation system. And the final one,
if you're a Muslim working a corporate job, then watch this video. When you're working for these massive companies,
this is a bit unfair, but I do worry about because I don't think this guy is from Morocco or from Middle Eastern lands, but he is wearing a thobe with a hoodie on. And I don't know, I feel like we sometimes, and I'm not like, this is arguably, to be honest, a little bit judgmental. I do have some of these clothes myself as well. But as an observation, Islam and being Muslim isn't inextricably tied up with a certain type of dress. So, just because you have studied, certain scholars have gone and studied in Saudi, or just because Saudi is where the Mecca and Medina is, doesn't mean that we are better Muslims, or we are somehow, approaching taqwa by wearing that white thobe and the red shimar. Islam is different. Islam is saying that, you should dress in a certain way, and actually the way that you should dress is modest, but with the clothing of the people. The people in the Quran, it talks, the people say, قالوا ما لهذا الرسول يأكل الطعام ويمشي في الأسواق. That this prophet, he just walks in the streets like us, in the marketplaces, he eats food. And another place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about how all of the prophets were sent to their people to talk to them in their own tongue. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wasn't there wearing a suit and a tie. He was there wearing the dress of their people. There aren't any hadith about how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go and wear specific clothes that were completely different to his culture. He was native to his culture. Anyway, that's a bit of a rant, and as I said, not necessarily focused on this brother himself. I myself have these clothes, but it's just a general observation.
And these types of industries, it's very easy to get sucked into the cultures and norms. It's very easy to kind of forget your own identity and become an apologetic Muslim. And this could take form by you simply attending an event that compromises your value. Or it could be you doing something in the workplace that compromises your values. Or it could mean you feel bad that you have to pray during the workday and hence you neglect your prayers. Or it can even go as far as you hiding your religion and not being proud of what you believe in. This is a reminder to all of you people who might find yourself in these types of situations, myself included, that your religion takes priority and your work is secondary. And it's important to constantly renew your intention and make sure you're doing everything for the sake of Allah, as opposed to trying to please the people around you at work, the company you work for, and potentially falling into a type of shirk. We should be proud of our religion, of our beliefs. We should be open with what we believe in, accessible for other people. It is a form of da'wah in a sense. And this is just your reminder not to be so reluctant to speak about your religion or claim your beliefs or practice your beliefs in the workplace.
Really interesting. I completely agree with everything that he's saying. We need to obviously be very proud of our religion. What I would say is, though, that it needs to be tempered. What sometimes can happen, most people, his advice is correct, most people are too afraid to even express the basics of their religion and kind of keep that under wraps. And actually, we should be proud of our Islam, and we should be presenting it not in a way of look at me, I'm a Muslim, F you kind of thing. It should be much more about, look at me, this is what I do, and I get a lot of value from it, a lot of solace from it, and let's have a discussion about my experience, and maybe you can benefit from that as well. That's the vibe it should be coming to them with. What I would say, that there are some people who go the other end of the spectrum, where they go too Muslim. I don't think you necessarily need to wear a topi to work. I don't think you need to be going into a corporate setting and say, I'm going to insist on wearing a thobe, which, as we've just discussed, is not intrinsically Islamic itself. I don't think we need to go that far. I think we need to have an element of balance in our lives. And Islam, whenever you feel like you're getting into territory that is a bit too difficult, Islam is not here to make things hard for people. Islam is an easy religion. So don't go too far on the other end of the spectrum as well. So there you go, folks. I hope you found that interesting. If you'd like me to react to more videos, please link them in the comments below. And if you'd like me to answer any questions that you guys have, we're going to have a Q&A session. Please, again, feel free to fire away a load of questions in the comments and I'll be picking out the best of them to answer in future videos. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.